Bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right, welcome, Fade to Black. How you doing? Today is Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What a great week here on Fade to Black. In case you're wondering, at the start of every show, I sit down and I put my coffee cup down, and the last couple of weeks, it's just kind of weird. My cups are leaking, and I've got a bad batch of coffee cups, and so now I'm always checking to make sure it's a long show. All right, I can't have a leaking coffee cup, so I pick up the cup, just make sure there's not a drop underneath it. Oh, OCD! I'm telling you, I've started to get up there in years. I'm noticing the strange habits that I have every entering and exiting a room, the things that I do. Anyway, and if you're too young to know, you'll find out. Yeah. Tonight, well, last night, Cass Clark was with us. What an absolutely remarkable show, the Penturk UFO incident. And tonight, we've got Laird Scranton back with us, one of my favorite people on planet Earth. And we're going to talk about his new book. Now, tonight, we're going to, this is what we're going to do tonight. The Dogon and physics. And I know what okay, Jimmy, we understand. No, tonight is where we are going. My two favorite things, ancient history and what we're learning, combined with the train wreck that is happening with science. I'm telling you, the two are just going to smash into each other. And it's guys like Laird Scranton that are going to make sure that train wreck is going to happen. So we're going to be doing that and talking about his new book, The Waters of Life. Tomorrow night, survivalist Cody London is here. He's got his new show out, The Survival Show. Excited about that too as well. And then Thursday night, the Aero UAP report, a very special presentation right here on Fade to Black. I am going to go through the entire report with you. But tonight, it's Laird. Laird is back with us. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter when it comes to Laird. Come on the show, Laird. Let's just talk. I'm going to get my knowledge on. And tonight we're going to be discussing his new book, The Waters of Life, which is a continuation from his prior book, Amma and the Spark of the Universe. And now, where are we going with all of this? Well, we're going to lay it all out for you tonight. I want to remind everybody, it was back in 2002, the science of the Dogon. And Laird and I were just talking about this, there are books out there that are required reading, and not only by you, this audience, but our community of researchers. We're all out there. We learn from each other, and Laird did just that. It started with the science of the Dogon, and his list of books. I don't have it in front of me, but we have the science of the Dogon, right? Sacred symbols of the Dogon. Right? The cosmological origins of the myth and symbol, the Velikovsky heresies, right? Point of origin, Orkney Island and his series of that Scarab Ray. So much he has published and worked on and researched. And I'm going to bring Laird straight in. But the reason why I say all of this, when you're out there and you're chasing answers, right? You've got your questions and you're chasing answers. Life is going to take you where it needs to take you. And that's the life of Laird Scranton. And there he is right there. Laird, my man.
Hey, How you doing?
Happy friggin' birthday.
Oh, thank you so much.
71 years old, man, and you're celebrating on my show. Somebody
They
pinned
give
you.
you another birthday every year, you know.
Oh man, so you good? Did you party today?
Yeah, I actually had a very nice day. My family always makes sure that I get taken care of. Go out to my wife jokes that we only like places with the word cafe in the name. And so we went to brunch at one of those places. We went to a dinner at another one. I've been pursuing a bunch of things all day. Facebook messages could be a full-time job on a birthday like this. I joke that in the future it's going to get easier because what will happen is your AI will have to wish my AI a happy birthday and we'll be done.
Yeah, we're getting close to that, man. We're getting close. You will not have to trip on that anymore, right? The 1,000 Facebook happy birthdays. Put that thing on autopilot. Every one of them a different answer, right? Different reply.
Get to the point where it's not really possible to directly answer everyone, but I really appreciate everyone, and I try to at least like everyone and take the time to read and appreciate the fact that someone took the time to wish me a happy birthday.
Yeah, well, okay. Happy birthday. But I there's an elephant in the room, so let's address this and move on. You put us through a scare last year.
Yeah.
This time last year, you were how do I say? I want to say this in a very polite way. You were hanging out with doctors.
Yes. Well, they took me in for a heart valve surgery that was supposed to be in and out. And unfortunately, things went sideways and I ended up in the hospital for about a month. At one point they had me on 40 life support devices. Somebody told me that was everything they had. If it was now a matter of just waiting to see if my body recovered, which fortunately it did.
Yeah, man. We're all of us in the community, right? We're following what's going on now, and and you're right. The Facebook messages started off benign, right? It was like, okay, a little thing going on, and then it was like a couple of days later, the post started coming. Oh crap!
Yes.
We've got an issue, and I was like, no. And
Laird's up on the roof, and we can't get him down. They ease you into it.
Woo, man! And then finally, it was a few weeks later, everything is fine.
Yes.
And man, what a good ending to that book, because you put us all through a scare, but everything is cool. The ticker's cool.
Yep,
you just had.
Yep. I walked a mile today. I'm working my way back up to the 4 miles I used to walk every morning. So things are good.
Yeah. Laird and I were just joking about that earlier. When you're young, you just don't give a crap. You don't. I mean, life is just like, man, I've got everything in front of me and it's going to last forever. And you just do stupid stuff. And I, it's part of growing up and everything. But you get to where you and I are right now, it's a different value.
My mother-in-law used to say that, you're in good health if you never have to think about it.
Oh, well done. Well, I think about it every minute of the day now. Every minute of the day. I'm walking around. I'm just a cranky old dude that I never thought that I would be. So, but it's great to have you back. And again, happy birthday. 71 trips around the sun. That's absolutely amazing.
71 is just the dyslexic form of 17. Come on.
Yeah, it is. Well, you know what they say, 71 is the new 17, right? That's what they're saying. Yeah. I kind of want to start here, and it's kind of a blanket statement, but we as a species is starting to find out that we are able to think and apply the stuff that we have learned to what we know now. And it's getting crazier as the library starts to fill up. but we are finding out that it's not so much what we have learned, but how much there is to actually know and discover.
Right.
Isn't that a crazy position that consciousness allows the human brain to operate in this capacity where I was talking to a physicist the other day on the show about this. It was like 150 years ago. I forget the physicist that said this, but there was this famous quote. I'm gonna tear it apart. But anyway, paraphrasing, there's nothing left to discover. Right?
Yeah.
We're done. We're done. And just, 25, 30 years later, that was like in 1860 or 1870, 1900 rolls around and things started to really go off the rails, literally, with atoms and physics and things and Einstein and his circle of people that were around him, and how quickly that we don't need to learn anything else turned into we know nothing, right? Very quickly.
Well,
And that's where we are. Isn't it interesting how we are able to think about these big subjects?
I saw a comedian who said, it reaches a point where your brain fills up, you learn something new on TV, and oops, there goes algebra. Not room to add new things.
Well, how is it that when we look at this and we'd like to think that we're smart, and then we turn around and we go back into history, prehistory, and the dawn of everything, and start to find out that these concepts that we are struggling with today apparently were fully understood and symbolized by ancient civilizations. Now that's where I'm going with it's amazing how much we don't know. Right. And that apparently these very, very critical basic concepts today that we struggle with. We struggle with gravity. We struggle with the universe. We struggle with particles. We struggle with the micro and the macro and the giantness of everything. But apparently they had a grip on it millennia ago. That's fascinating.
Yep. Somebody way back when, it looks as if somebody who really understood this stuff did their level best to try to represent it in a way that would be possible for us to understand. In math class in high school, they teach you about reducing fractions, that if you can simplify the fraction, you realize, that big complicated expression really means 1/2. If you can simplify the fraction, everything becomes easier. And so what somebody did in these ancient times was try to do that with all of these concepts of science that strike us as being so complicated, but you get down to the bottom of it, it's not really all that complicated. If you know what you're talking about.
Do you have to be a physicist to understand Laird Scranton?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I spent the last couple of years focusing on reading writings of some of those top physicists you were talking about from the 1920s and 30s. Some of them, these are the guys who witnessed all of the great discoveries, and some of them took the time to write books aimed at people like you and me. You say, okay, let's skip all the math and let's explain in plain language, what the discoveries were and why this one knocked that one out of the water, and why is it we believe one thing and we don't believe the other thing. And there were like probably a half a dozen of these physicists who did that. And I'm sort of into the range of the symbolism, the ancient symbolism, where my job is to demonstrate that these things are scientifically reasonable, but I have to go to those physicists in order to do it now. I know back in 2020, before lockdown hit, you were talking about going to Göbekli Tepe. I know you've done specials on Göbekli Tepe. I don't know if you actually made it there.
Not yet. I was going to go this year, and but anyway, 100% 2025 Göbekli Tepe. Yeah,
that's great. Well, looked at the right way, all of those symbolic elements at Göbekli Tepe all represent a single idea. A few decades ago, there was one of the presidential candidates made it partway through his campaign, and sort of slapped himself in the head and said, I've been talking about all these issues and I realize there's only one issue. It's the economy, stupid. Pay attention to the economy. Well, it's the same way with the symbolism, that you get down to the bottom of the symbolism and there's really only one issue they're talking about. They're talking about how magnetism and electricity come together. And the Dogon symbolism is trying to beat through our stupid little heads what the basic attributes of both of those energies are. And they use simple symbols to associate with concepts, like they're trying to explain the concept of vibrations of energy, and they use the image of a rabbit. The rabbit shivers all the time, and they use the shivering of the rabbit to represent vibration, the concept of vibration. So individual symbols like that work really well to represent a single concept. But if you're trying to get into talking about dynamics of what happens over time, what do these two energies do together, you can't do that with single symbols. So what they did was they anthropomorphized the energies. Amma is the personification of magnetism, and there's another character named Ogo who's the personification of electricity. And then they present a creation myth where Amma and Ogo are doing certain things, and when you have a better understanding of how the energies work, you realize they're acting out what the energies do. And when you know that, then it becomes very easy to see what the myth is about. This isn't a real story. This is an allegory to try to explain the science to somebody like me.
Well, and that we're going to stay right there, but that is such a good point. And I have talked to a lot of physicists about this. Mathematics, algorithms, and the way that they are calculated and presented is unreadable gibberish to 8 billion people on this planet.
Right.
And there's 8.1 billion people, right? There's a very select few that can understand that. But then when you take it one step further, it is it's one to calculate it, but what does it represent?
Right.
So what it represents, it's interpolated, not translated, right? It's interpolated by a physicist into words for the common man to understand what these numbers represent.
Right.
And those books are amazing to me. I can't look at the math. I've tried. I'm in the middle of a physics course right now, and every time I kind of like, man, okay, all right, I got it. Then I realize I don't.
Yeah, well, Einstein said if a person can't explain to a 6-year-old what a concept is about in a way that a 6-year-old will understand, they don't grasp their subject. So
that's it.
That's the level we want to bring it down to, is to a level a 6-year-old could understand.
Yeah, and the basics of physics, even like relativity, but not going into that in depth, but the basics of the basics: mass, speed, velocity. Right? You got 2 of the 3, and no matter what, you can get to that other number. That's all we're dealing with here. Well, okay, you can wrap your head around that. Right? Okay, you can. How does that turn into 11 dimensions in string theory? How do the numbers represent? How do you get to that? Right? That's a whole nother thing. And you need a physicist to explain that. But that symbolism, that presentation is what the Dogon did. And that is what is crazy. That you have to be able to tell the story in a way that everybody would understand.
Right. And worse than just understand, that system was aimed at a future technological audience like ours, where there was enough knowledge of silence to be able to make sense of what they were talking about. And so they had to put it together in a way so that over the course of thousands and thousands of years, a whole string of initiates are going to be able to keep the system together in its right form, so that by the time it reaches somebody like us, we know what they're talking about.
Well, and now even the other issue with this is we can't even get physicists to get along.
Right.
And the only reason why we have progressed is because of the infighting with the physicist drove them to prove their points, or at least to get to answers. Because if they all agreed, we would have just come to a standstill. Right? We wouldn't have
They
progressed.
end up embarrassing each other, and that's sort of how progress is made. Is somebody puts forward a theory that a thing has to be true, and then at the next conference, somebody raises their hand in the back of the conference and says, "Oh yeah, but what about this?" And suddenly the guy is embarrassed in front of all of his colleagues.
Now, take me to the moment, if you will, the moment where you had that aha as you were
These have
looking
been
at the
almost
symbol.
continuous aha moments for a couple of decades for me. That I may have had several of them just this week, where a thing that I didn't realize, a piece I didn't realize how it all fit together, it comes together. If you start out simple, we were all taught in elementary school and middle school about atoms. We know about atoms, we know about protons and electrons and neutrons. Well, starting to read the Dogon material, I could see that they were correctly describing what an atom was, and they correctly described the components of an atom, except they confused me because they talked about electrons and protons, but they didn't talk about neutrons. And I thought, how can I not talk about neutrons? Well, later on down the line, I learned that a neutron isn't really a thing. A neutron is now considered to be a transformation of a proton. When the electron gets a little too close to the proton, they merge with each other and they produce what looks to us like a neutron. So in a lot of cases, the Dogon get things it looks like they get something wrong, but that's one of the entry points for me. When it looks to me like they got something wrong, that's something I need to examine very carefully, because it always turns out they're right about it.
Okay, so let's get to the aha moment. That was a political answer, but let's get to the aha moment where you were the first time you noticed a Dogon symbol represented, you said rabbit, so let's just go there, right? It wasn't a rabbit, it was something else. And
well, let's back up from there to, I would say, one of the tangible aha moments for me. I was following Robert Temple's bibliography in his book, The Serious Mystery, and I was following along with the books he had listed and ordering copies of them and studying them, things like that. Well, there's one of those books that I couldn't get. This was back in the 1990s when you couldn't go online and just order out of print books. It was called Ancient Near Eastern Texts Related to the Old Testament. This is a 700-page book. It's basically a compilation of all of the papyruses and things they discovered that have information in them that ultimately pertains to the Old Testament. So I looked all over for it. I couldn't find it. No used bookstore had it. None of the new bookstores could order it. I even went to the Vassar College Interlibrary Loan Service. I went to Vassar College. I thought maybe they could order it for me. No, they couldn't get the book. So,
what was that? What was that? What was the name of the book again?
Ancient Near Eastern Texts Relating to the Old Testament.
By who?
Good question. It's a series of names. There are a bunch of academics who worked on it. But so I finally came back to my wife, Risa, and I said, well, it looks like I'm not going to be able to get that book I'm looking for. And I resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't be able to get it. So you fast forward a week or two, and a box turns up at the back door of our house, a big box. And we bring it in. It's from one of Risa's aging cousins. He lived in a little apartment in Queens, New York, and he was constantly running out of space. And so periodically what he would do is, to free up space, he would toss a bunch of random crap into a box and mail it off to some relative. So in this particular box, there were oven mitts and flags of the nation and just every kind of unusual thing you could expect. But there in the bottom of the box was my book.
That is the universe. See, Laird, right there. That is the universe smacking you upside the head.
That's right. And at that point, I said to myself, it's clear that there are things going on in the world that we can't immediately explain. Now, once you accept that, then all sorts of interesting things started happening. I've spoken to other researchers like Andrew Collins and said, tell me about the unusual circumstances you've experienced. And they go into long lists of things like that have happened that just shouldn't happen, but that have made their research possible because they did happen. Now, years later, I was researching an Egyptian goddess of birth and death. Her name was Meshkenet. And I couldn't find any information on her. I looked through a bunch of the sources I have, and none of them had very good information about her, except that 700-page book. And it mentioned Meshkenet, and it happened to comment, by the way, one of Meshkenet's roles in ancient Egypt is she's responsible for seeing to it that authors have what they need.
Hold on, I'm busy ordering the book.
Oh, okay.
I'm busy ordering the book. Ancient Near East text relating to the Old Testament.
I can get you a name if you want, an author name.
Okay, let's see. Oh, here it is right here.
Huh.
Dude, it's $200.
Yeah, probably. They are. You can look
James Pritchard.
Thank you. Here, my wife recently just brought me the book.
That's it. That's it.
If you go to a site called adall.com, they have an out of print tab, and oftentimes you can find a book like this at a reasonable price, but it's a used copy, but they tell you what kind of condition it's in.
Man, the digital version of it's $150.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of these books are. I was lucky to get them when I did, because you can't get them anymore.
Yeah, this was 1969. Okay, but I've got it here. I'm bookmarking it, and that's going to be my gift to myself. That's my kind of book right there. We were talking about this earlier. The drier, right? The drier the book, the more I'm going to read it.
Well, we were talking about the Göbekli Tepe and the symbolism of Göbekli Tepe. Okay, the original concept of a sanctuary was a place where non-material and material energies come together. This is talking about magnetism and electricity. Pretty much every symbolic element that's of importance at Göbekli Tepe represents that same concept in a different way. You know about the carved arms and hands that come down the sides of the pillar, and the hands come together at the end of the pillar. That represents the concept of an embrace, and it's another way of representing the two energies coming together. One of my aha moments was realizing that an ancient Egyptian word that means embrace also means pillar.
Now, I was just in Peru. I was at Tiwanaku specifically, went to Pumapunku, go across the street, literally right across the street to Tiwanaku. And walking around, and that's a big site. That's Tiwanaku's not small, and you know this. And I'm walking around the corner, right in front of me. I'm looking at this pillar. It's in the middle of this square. It's by itself, and I see the hands right in the front, and a belt, What? I walk around this. Oh, dude, this is Göbekli Tepe.
Right.
And the same there, the differences were actually subtle.
Right.
Okay, this was not like no. This is too. You really look at it, and you take a really close look. The belt, the designs, the way the hands were represented, and the human figure, and how they came around in the front. And that again, that's not a coincidence. That's something where you need to just step back and go, what is going on? And like I said, it doesn't really answer any questions, but it certainly presents a bunch.
When we're done here, take a moment, and my wife Risa just brought me a note that she's turned up a copy of that book you're looking for $56.
Okay, send it to me. Don't put it in the chat, because somebody will.
Well,
I love her so much. When I call you, Risa, she's like,
Yeah.
Laird, Jimmy's on the phone.
Yeah, she's my fact checker. She's the one who's making sure that I'm not just spouting crap here.
She's the absolute best, and I love her to death. Okay, so, but how is it when we are struggling today with magnetism and thermodynamics and electromagnetism in the universe and trying to understand particles and waves, right?
I can explain to you why energy is both particle-like and wave-like. It would take a little while, but this material gets down to that level of things. That's actually in the waters of life is the discussion of why that's true.
Well, let's go. I'm ready. And, here, let me tell you something else. And I love your research into this, but here's the deal. When we look at we have our own mythological symbols today. One of them is Schrodinger's cat.
Right.
It's mythological now, where if you go back and you look at Schrodinger's original comment, I'm not saying comment, about the idea from this, that turned into legend, the true definition of legend, where it's this giant thought experiment: is the cat alive or dead? And the multi-worlds, the multiverse, the parallel, all of that came off, and it's like that's not even what he meant. Number one,
I have a cartoon and it shows Schrodinger holding a box, and he's saying there is no way to know without opening the box whether the cat is alive or dead. And out of the box comes the sound meow.
and we have that, and so we struggle today with some of the things that we thought were pretty solid, and the Big Bang and thermodynamics and entropy and things that we can say, waves and quantum mechanics and where we are that are not necessarily as solid as we thought they were. But the Dogon struggled with this too as well, didn't they?
Well, they didn't really struggle because they had the advantage of teachers who already understood it all. So whereas our scientists are telling us my theory is blah, 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 they're presenting it as theory. The Dogon material was given to them as this isn't theory, this is how it works. And we know how it works, and we're going to tell you how it works.
Well, that's it. But I guess that's my point. They weren't struggling with it.
Right. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah, they were discussing it.
Right. That's right. It was a subject of conversation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Now, everything is taught. Okay, so let's talk about the Dogon for a second. Culturally, in a linear way, how old are we talking about is the culture of the Dogon?
Okay, the Dogon society preserves civic practices like the calendars they use and the way they measure time, and all the things they do civically are predictive of what we know happened in ancient Egypt at about 3000 BC, right at the border between pre-dynastic and dynastic time. So that's where Dogon society is pointing us to, but that's based on information that looks like it was being presented on Orkney Island a couple of hundred years before that, and that traces back to information that was being presented at Göbekli Tepe a couple of thousand years before that. So like it goes back to 9000 BC is the first example we have that relates to the concept of Ganesha, the elephant. If you look at the authorities on Ganesha in India in different fields, they all say, well, based on the evidence we have, the worship of Ganesha goes back to the early centuries BC. But there are hints that it goes back much further than that, but they just they can't tie it back. My material ties it back to 9000 BC.
And geographically, the orientation of the Dogon in Africa in relation to Egypt was where?
Okay, Egypt is on sort of the far east side of the continent. The Dogon are in the south of Mali. This is in the hump of Africa on the west side, down a little ways, down about 8 hours drive from Timbuktu.
Now, does that match with the picture that you're building with not only migration but culturally exchanging ideas? Were the Dogon in the right place to share this information? I'm gonna bring up Atlantis and the A word here in just a second. I'm
Okay.
gonna
I'll go back to
dovetail this
Tepe.
in.
Okay. All of these ancient words carry clusters of meaning, so it's hard to translate them. One of the common translations of Göbekli Tepe is Central Hill. That's the same as the translation in Greece of the suffix opolis. In Greece, they would put a temple up on a centralized hill, and that was where they would teach things. Göbekli Tepe, if you look at a map, is situated square in the middle of a bunch of land masses. It's easy to get to China. It's easy to get to Egypt. It's easy to get into Africa. You can go all directions from the Near East and be in contact with people. So Göbekli Tepe was a centralized site where it looks like they were teaching all these concepts. When you look at this, it's hard to put together. One of my books is called Tracing Orkney's Origins. What it does is, at about 4000 BC, a bunch of farmers came to Orkney Island in the northern Scotland, and nobody's sure where they came from. They have all these establishing elements that they know were there from the very start, but they pick one of these elements and they say, well, we can't pin down where this came from. This might have gotten here by 15 different paths, so we don't know where the people came from. That approach is the wrong approach. What you have to do instead is look at the clusters of elements and say, where do we see the same clusters? And it turns out they all start out in the Near East about the era of Göbekli Tepe, and they move hand in hand with each other across all the major islands in the Mediterranean, out Gibraltar and up the coast of Europe and through the Hebrides to Orkney by around 4000 BC. And literally every founding element we see on Orkney at 3600 BC existed in similar form in Malta in the immediately prior era. So I say fairly categorically that the Orkney farmers came from Malta.
Now, did the Dogon, in your estimation, especially in that part of Africa, which we now know as pretty messed up place, right? It's desert, right? It's just sand.
Right. Deliberately hard to get to and hard to live in.
But if we push this back to the Ice Age, pre-Ice Age, this was a totally different area in concept. And there's a lot of theories about what civilization actually was back then. You weren't living in a harsh climate. Right. It was a bit different. Now, if the Dogon thrived there, and there's this whole conversation right now with the Eye of Africa, and is that possibly Atlantis, which is just north of where the Dogon thrived. But the teachers of the Dogon would have come in from somewhere else too, as well as being teachers from around the world. Are we talking about pushing this back tens of thousands of years, 50,000 years, or are we like around the Ice Age, 10,000 BC timeframe?
Okay, one of our clues is that the Dogon have a very secretive altar stone that they protect. And I came across an image of it on the internet one time, and I had the sense to download it. This was a Getty Images image, so it should be out there in the world. I can't get Getty Images to admit that it was their image. I can't find a copy of it online anymore. I can't find the credited photographer who took the image, and they can't put me in contact with him. But on this altar stone, you have carved images of animals that are indistinguishable from what you see at Göbekli Tepe. So it looks to me as if the Dogon originally received their instruction at Göbekli Tepe at 9000 BC.
That's radical.
Yeah, it's radical.
And I love it. Yeah, I love that.
And there are all sorts of other factors that tie things together. On Orkney, a lot of the livestock that was there originally was originally domesticated in the Near East sometime before 6000 BC. A lot of the plants they have there were originally domesticated there. Of course, that doesn't really say anything because everyone's version of those plants and animals tie back to the Near East. But there are certain things on Orkney. There are types of red deer there. They found evidence of aurochses, which are huge bulls on Orkney that were only ever domesticated in two places. One was in the Near East and along the Mediterranean, and another place was on the north of the Mediterranean, up near closer to the Black Sea area. So it's pretty clear to me that whoever brought those animals to Orkney had to have come from the Mediterranean.
Is in your estimation, now I like the Göbekli Tepe connection here, of course, but is it possible? I know I've asked you this before, but is it possible with Mali's orientation to Egypt? It's a bit of a walk for sure,
right?
But it's actually pretty close. There could have been a relationship and a trade route and everything else between the Egyptians and the Dogons, and I don't think that's far of a stretch. Do you make those same connections?
The connection I make is to Orkney, and I'll give you some examples. Okay, on Orkney has some really interesting geography. That I don't know if you're familiar with a place called the Standing Stones of Stennis. This is the first megalithic standing stone site in the United Kingdom. And it sits on a piece of land that is in direct view of two mountains with a gap in between them. And the reason that's important is because the way it's set geographically, you see the sun rise in the east and you see it set in the west behind those mountains. And a person standing at the Standing Stones of Stennis is actually a pillar called the Watchstone, that you can watch that sun day after day after day and watch the sun shift back and forth behind those two mountains, so that on the equinox, it sets squarely between the two mountains. So what they're doing is they're giving visibility to two modes of energy that are very important to the cosmology. One relates to the seasonal motions of the sun that move from equinox to solstice and back again. The other one is the linear motion of the sun from sunrise to sunset. Now you go to Abydos at about 3000 BC, and you have a first dynasty cemetery set in direct view of two mountains just like that, with a gap in between it called Peg of the Gap, where the sun sets on the equinox. And Seti tells us that the word Abdu, which was the original name of Abydos, meant the desired mountain. It's clear that they picked that site because of its relationship to that mountain, which is honorific of Orkney a couple of hundred years earlier. You have that same technique adopted by all sorts of groups. Hinduism, that became a ritual practice, that all of their significant sites were set in view of two mountains like that. If you go to the place called Vulture Peak, that is a famous school in Buddhism, it's set in view of mountains that work that way. If you go to Akhenaten's relocated capital south, 1,500 miles south in Egypt, it's set with a pillar in view of two mountains just like that, only Akhenaten's mountains frame the sun as it rises, not as it sets.
Why, if and every culture talks about somebody teaching them,
right?
Everyone. I don't think that there's an exclusive here.
Right, I agree.
Yeah, and so when we look at that, do you think that we will get a firm understanding of who those teachers were?
Yeah, actually, I have that, and you won't like the answer. But yeah, I can already put my finger on who those teachers likely were. And I can also put my finger on why the explanation the Dogon and the Buddhists give as to who they are, even though it sounds ridiculous, is actually right.
Okay, let's go.
Their perspective is, okay, let me back up a little bit and try to explain how this works. This is based on the dynamics of those two energies. Think about motorized vehicles. It doesn't matter whether you have a VW Bug or whether you have a tractor trailer. They both work on engines that are based on the same principles. The engines work the same way. Well, the Dogon say that the energy that drives all these stages of matter and of the universe works the same way, all the way up the scale from the tiniest example to the largest example. It's all the same dynamics of energy. And in that continuum of energy, what happens is that energy self-differentiates into 14 zones, so 14 domains. The same way that if you go to the deepest parts of the ocean and down into the deep sea water, it self-differentiates into biological zones, so that there's certain plants and animals that live on the bottom and certain that live at each stage in between, some that live at the surface, depending on how much sunlight do they like and how much what temperature of water do they like and what water pressure do they like, and factors like that. They self-differentiate. There's certain animals like whales and dolphins that can freely cross between those zones. They don't care that there are biological zones. They go where they want to. Well, the Dogon are saying that in these energetic zones compare to Hinduism's levels of consciousness. And the Dogon are saying that a form of consciousness that existed in the one of these energetic domains, probably the one right next to ours, was able to materialize in our domain and take physical action teaching us, which sounds ridiculous, but there are scientifically reasonable perspectives for how that could happen. And I have some specific examples of information that matches the Dogon that comes from a source that is connected to one of those domains, or it seems.
Keep going. You've got my attention.
Okay. So another way to think of this is, okay, that if you go in a submarine very far down into the ocean, that it's not safe to just open the hatch and step out of the ocean because there's a difference in water pressure. And so you'll kill yourself. Or in outer space, you can't open the hatch because you get blown out the door. There's a difference in pressure. But if you can use an airlock and equalize the pressure, then it's perfectly safe to move through. So the factor in this continuum of energy that is shifting is the pace that time runs at. You can think of it like an hourglass where you start out with all the sand up in the top globe and it filters down into the lower globe. Well, at some point in that process, you end up with an equal amount of sand in the top globe that you have in the bottom globe. We have a cycle of energy going on between two universes that works that same way. And at the midpoint of that cycle, which happened to be around 3600 BC, there should have been as much mass in our universe as there was in the universe that the energy was coming from, and the time frame should have equalized. And at that point, it's theoretically possible for a consciousness that lived in a domain other than ours to move across into our domain. The same way you can move out of a submarine into deep sea water safely.
Keep going. I'm with you. I'm with you.
The Dogon are saying that their teachers were originally non-material. As a matter of fact, they said their teachers were very concerned about what the effects would ultimately be, the bad effects would be on us from coming too close to them. If we go back to those Old Testament texts, we remember the story about Moses on the mountain and all the cautions that were given to the Israelites to keep back from that mountain, because if they got too close, it was dangerous. It's because the energetics that Moses was interacting with on the mountain were those kinds of energetics.
Is this cyclical?
Yes. And so our domain, which right now is the more material of those two domains, at a different point in the cycle will become the less material of the two domains.
Okay, so if we back up, so 3600 BC, I like that timeline. That's a good one. That's a good one. A lot of things happened right then.
Right, the beginning of the Hebrew calendar, for one thing.
Nabda Playa.
Right.
Okay. Man, I wanted to get back to Stennis, but let's stay right here for a second. So, when was the if that one at 3600?
Right.
And if it's cyclical, when would the previous
the
one.
cycle would have begun just after the end of the Ice Age, and the Göbekli Tepe era is fairly close, maybe 1,000 years after that.
So about 7,000 year cycle? Is that what
This
we're
is
looking
a
at?
12,000 year cycle. This is the Yuga cycle. The Yuga cycle is
We're
about
going with the Yuga. Okay,
yeah.
well then how does that connect?
25,920 years. Now, all of the ancient units of time are factors of them. The
Right.
60-second minute, the 12-month year, the
Gotcha.
right.
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Laird.
Right. So somebody took that largest cycle that we can perceive and based all of the ancient units of time on factors of that.
Now, so if we did that, then the end of the Bronze Age, when all of the civilizations fell in the Mediterranean, that would have been on that cycle too.
Well, it would have been. That's a little bit later.
It is. That's 1200 BC, but it's offset on the Yuga cycle of 3600 BC.
Right.
So if you add that, you would land right about.
Right.
Wow.
Now, from
Laird,
that perspective, we've just recently passed the bottom of the cycle and we're on our way back up. So we're now very slowly becoming less material than we did before. You notice there are all sorts of discoveries the scientists are making about forms of matter or forms of energy they didn't realize existed before that now they can suddenly be aware of. I think that's going to happen more and more as the cycle continues on. Now, the reason the cycle happens is because there's a structure out there that centers on the belt stars of Orion. It's called Barnard's Loop. From our perspective, it looks like it's a spiraling structure. It's a birthplace of stars.
Mm-hmm.
And our sun, according to the Dogon, and the two Sirius stars all emerge from that birthplace of stars together. That spiral is rotating. And the suggestion is, Schwaller said, that the reason Sirius doesn't seem to precess is because it sits at the center of that rotation. Our sun is being carried around in a circle by that rotation, which in some eras brings us closer towards Sirius, and in other eras brings us farther away from Sirius. That's why the redshift changes. We see Sirius now as a bright blue-white star. In ancient times, all sorts of commentators said it was red.
We're having that issue right now with the Betelgeuse too, as well. Betelgeuse is changing right in front of us.
Right. So the reason that's happening is because this rotational cycle is changing what direction those two stars, our sun and that star, are moving in relation to each other.
Now, okay, so let's stay right here. Is it possible? I'm just suggesting this. Could a collider, we have dozens of them on this planet. There's not just one. The one we always think about is CERN, right? The Large Hadron. Right. But we have Lawrence Livermore. We've got 5 right here in the United States that are spinning stuff right now, that are colliding stuff right now as you and I speak. Right. Is it possible that something like that could be the pressure chamber? The airlock, if you will?
It could be. In fact, the Great Pyramid has the capacity to resonate at all the frequencies between ours and the quickest frequencies. Okay, if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, look at any representation of the electromagnetic spectrum, it moves from gamma rays, which are very short wavelength waves that existed at the time of the Big Bang. What existed as gamma rays at that point in time, we now see as microwaves, which are much, much, much longer waves. That spectrum documents the progressive slowing of the pace of time that the Dogon are saying is going on. And so the collider you're talking about, it's possible that one of the purposes of that collider is to try to interact in some way with all those different domains. It looks to me as if the Great Pyramid was capable of doing that. It looks to me that over time, from 3600 BC on, someone was trying to sort of hold open a channel to all those other domains of consciousness, and that as time moved on, that became harder and harder. Way back in the day, there were lots of stories about fairies in the UK. Everybody and his brother had a story about contact with fairies. But as time went on, they got less and less frequent. At one point in the process, if you went back to the same site a year later, you could see the same fairies dancing in the same circle they had been dancing in a year earlier. If you know the story of Rip Van Winkle, the author of Rip Van Winkle's Washington Irving, his father was born and lived on Orkney. Rip Van Winkle falls asleep and ends up sort of abducted by fairies. And when he comes back, everybody he knows has aged. They're very old, and he's still the same age. There's a time difference between the fairy domain and our domain. So as the cycle has moved on, it became a greater and greater task to try to hold open this sort of bubble space contact with all of the other domains of energy. And so it looks to me like the pyramid may have been one of those attempts.
Is it possible, with looking at the origin stories that are presented to us in plain sight? I mean, all of these cultures have done their best to try to explain their origin stories to us. And going back to the biblical text, if this I don't have a better way to put it, but if this alignment happened and this airlock was there, and the transference of teachers, whether they were physical or non-physical, okay, that's not the point, but it's certainly information is moving. Is that the same as angels? Is this a voice of God? Is this the voice of heaven?
I can actually answer that. Okay. I was saying that those domains of energy relate to Hinduism's levels of consciousness.
Yes.
Okay? Now, that's because the same energetics that produce matter, according to the Dogon, also produce consciousness. They produce biological life, and they produce the universe. One set of dynamics of energy. And the dynamics are so parallel between those four creational themes that the Dogon use a single progression of symbols to simultaneously describe all four of those processes. So that a symbol that has meaning for how matter forms also has meaning for how biological life comes about, or for consciousness. Now, the most basic level of consciousness along that scale has a name. Its name is Rena. Re is a cosmological phonetic that means energy, and Na is a cosmological phonetic that implies non-material femininity. This is the energy of the non-material feminine. That name in the Egyptian hieroglyphic language is written with two glyphs. The first glyph is an almond shape. It's the Egyptian mouth glyph. It looks like the shape of an almond. And the second glyph is a zigzag line. It's the single wave glyph. Now, if you go back to those 1920s physicists, in 1927, there was a physicist named de Broglie. His name was Louis de Broglie. He was an aristocrat in France, and he was one of the top physicists. He was a colleague of Einstein's, and he
won the Nobel Prize in 1929, I think.
Right. Okay. Now, in 1927, he published a paper where he had noticed, and he demonstrated mathematically, that the different the stable orbits that an electron can take in a hydrogen atom all correspond to points of resonance for the energy. These are places, okay, to explain what resonance is, if you have a large wave that repeats regularly, and now you take a smaller wave that is an even factor of that bigger wave, so you can fit an even number of the smaller waves into the framework of the larger wave, you've reached a point of resonance. The resonance points are the points that we hear as musical notes on a musical scale. Every one of, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, those are all resonance points. So de Broglie noticed that these hydrogen atom orbits corresponded to the resonance points, and he diagrammed the energies that were creating them. There were two energies. One involved what he called the cyclical influence of magnetism on the orbiting electron. And the other, that when he graphed that, it was the shape of an almond. And the second one, which he called the pivotal influence of magnetism on the components of the proton. The proton is like a little magnet, and its two poles are oscillating in and out at almost the speed of light. And that graph was a zigzag line. In that, you go to the Egyptian hieroglyphs, and you discover Budge has listed a word written with those two glyphs. He considers it to be the divine name. But when you read the symbols, substitute phonetics for symbols, or you substitute concepts for symbols, he pronounces it Ren, but it really should be Re-Na, and it should be interpreted to mean energy of the feminine non-material. This is the hidden energy that underlies everything.
My mind is blown. And de Broglie, he, you know what? I've got a real problem, Laird.
Okay.
If I've got posters on my wall of physicists, that's how I've got issues, man. I've got issues. And he's one of them that we could talk about Wheeler, Niels Bohr, Einstein, and Schrodinger, and it's on and on and on and on. That whole circle, right? But he brought up these concepts of duality,
right?
Of waves and particles that they're the same. Right. Observation comes into play.
Yeah. Now, do you like conspiracy theories? I have one for you.
Okay. Well, so I want to hear it.
Okay. And that 1927 paper of de Broglie's,
right,
became the foundation of Schrodinger's quantum theory.
That's right. Okay? Yes,
Einstein highly praised it at the time it was published. But inexplicably, the paper never got translated into another language. It's never mentioned again in any of their later works. They disappeared it.
Never translated in French, right? He wins the Nobel Prize.
Right, but this was never translated into other languages. Until 2018, there's a Quebec physicist named Michaud, André Michaud, who published a paper about resonant states of the hydrogen atom. And he brought to light the fact that this very significant paper of de Broglie's got disappeared for a century. All of the answers are in that paper. We were talking about wave-particle duality.
Yes.
What happens is when you have two energies like that move into and out of phase with each other, okay? The way that magnetism and electricity work, each one, when it's in motion, evokes the other energy. And so they end up coming into resonance with each other and then out of resonance again. And when that happens, there's an effect that's produced. You've probably seen the effect. If you've ever driven your car on a highway and rolled down just one window, you heard a wacka, 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 wacka sound. Those are called beat frequencies. So anytime you have two energies like this, like magnetism and electricity, that are entwined that way, they naturally produce beat frequencies, and those beat frequencies are the quanta that waves of energy naturally self-define themselves into, the same way the Dogon say that the energy of the universe self-discriminates these domains, exactly the same way.
That's crazy town. And de Broglie, if we were talking earlier about these physicists debating and hanging out with each other, he was one of the circle, right? He was. And without his observations of his ideas of duality and particles and waves are the same at different states, suggesting this quantum mechanics and thermodynamics all spun off of these ideas at the same time. And he was pivotal for these ideas to come out. He wins the Nobel in 1929, was still kind of influential and stuff, but Schrodinger got all the fame.
Right.
Niels Bohr got all the fame. Later it was John Wheeler and Feynman, and Einstein was already solidified, and de Broglie just kind of disappeared.
Well, I'll tell you what happened was, okay, they disappeared that paper, it looks like, which could not have happened if they hadn't all cooperated. If you look at later work by Einstein or de Broglie, you can't even find the word resonance in the index of the book. That disappeared. So it looks to me like de Broglie and Einstein were privately working on those concepts of his, while everybody else was running with the idea that the quantum domain is probabilistic, which in de Broglie's final book of the 1960s, 1964, he flatly says, look, here are all the reasons why the probabilistic view can't possibly be right. And he gives you experiment after experiment that demonstrates it can't possibly be right, that these are causal effects. And just because we can't observe them doesn't mean anything. This comes back to, there's a child development concept of object permanency. It's that when a child learns that just because mommy walks out of view doesn't mean she stopped existing.
Do you think that de Broglie read hieroglyphs?
No, he didn't. He had no idea of the connection to the hieroglyphs. It just, the system I'm working with, that's such a significant piece of information, I couldn't believe that it wasn't represented, so I went looking for it. And sure enough, it's right there.
That's pretty crazy. Now, how did the Dogon, okay, so that's Egypt, how did the Dogon represent it?
Okay, the Dogon don't have a written language.
No, so but they had their symbols.
They have terms for resonance and that fall in line with the concepts. This is all part of the Waters of Life book. There's a section in there where I'm talking about de Broglie's paper and where I'm talking about what the connection is to the hieroglyphs, to the Dogon words, and so forth. This is all integrated stuff. So the Dogon perspective is absolutely the same perspective. Einstein was the one who figured out that those resonant points don't stop having effect when energy leaves the atom, that they also apply to energy in the open universe, that the same dynamics are at play. And so the same dynamics are what are causing waves of energy to look like waves from one perspective, but look like particles from the other perspective. It's because these beat frequencies are self-differentiating particle-like sections in them.
How did the Dogon understand what was being taught to them?
Well, the teachers, one of my books is called Primal Wisdom of the Ancients, and I talk about all of the different techniques that were being used that we see as insightful techniques of teachers. They were very capable at using intuitive metaphors to explain things. The idea of a metaphor is, if I want to teach you a concept that you don't understand, but I know that it's very much like another concept you already thoroughly understand, if I can create a metaphor that relates one of the things to the other thing, suddenly you're in full grasp of what I'm trying to tell you without my having to say anything. Same thing if I can explain to you that cold is the opposite of hot, and you know what hot is, you're in a position to figure out what cold means. So as the Dogon's teachers were explaining these concepts, they relied very heavily on very intuitive metaphors to be able to convey ideas to people. And they didn't limit themselves to one metaphor. Like at Göbekli Tepe, where I say all of the symbolic elements there all refer to this concept of the energies coming together. Any element that's original to the tradition does that. It has a degree of self-confirmation of meaning. They don't rely on just one statement to get a message across. The same thing with synchronicities. I told you two aspects of that book I found. Two references that said, look, this was a meaningful coincidence, not just a simple coincidence. Coincidences work that same way, that if you see, like I was driving along the street and I turned a corner and saw a vulture sitting on top of a power line. What's a vulture doing on top of a power line in Albany, New York? It's not. when that kind of thing happens and the same reference comes up in other contexts, now you have confirmation of the fact that this wasn't just a simple coincidence, this was a meaningful coincidence. And I take that as sort of indication that I need to go dig further into whatever that symbol is.
Did the Dogon, I'm trying to wrap my head around this because the symbolism is there and the understanding is there. But to Einstein, let's move forward in time. Then we're going to go back to Dogon. Einstein and other physicists and theoretical physicists, and quantum was a new word. That was a new word.
Right.
Okay, that was a new area of science.
Right.
They could. Nobody saw an atom.
No.
Nobody saw a quark. Nobody saw a photon. Nobody saw an electron.
Right.
Nobody knew. They couldn't see them.
Right.
It was the math that supported this.
No, but there's another way of getting at it, and this is what the Dogon are about.
Laird.
Now,
can I ask? Laird?
Yeah.
Can I ask the question first?
Sure. Sorry about that.
But you're answering the. I mean, how is it? Well, if we today present theories about things that we can't see.
Right.
What more proof do you want? You don't have to have you don't have to see an atom to have it explained to you like the Dogon did.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to suggest here.
Okay, well, the Dogon give us a very important fact. The fact is the dynamics of energy don't change regardless of what scale we observe them on. So there are domains like the quantum domain where we can't directly observe what's going on. But we don't have to because we know whatever's going on there has to be parallel to what happens on domains we can see. And so one of the domains they point us to try to understand what's going on is the domain of stars. The way that the two Sirius stars and the Earth star, the sun, work with each other illustrate those dynamics on a scale that we can't miss if they can only point us to them. That's why the three pyramids reflect the belt stars of Orion. We look to the belt stars and ask ourselves, what could possibly be significant about this? I realized that there was a relationship between the concept of a cubit and the concept of a light year. The Egyptian word for cubit was akumeh, which is literally light measure. So I also knew that Robert Bauval, who's a friend of mine, was suggesting that the three large pyramids pointed to the three belt stars of Orion. So I asked myself, how do we know how big a cubit is? Well, we know it because we inferred it from the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. It measures 440 royal cubits per side of the base, square base, and it measures 280 cubits high. So I went to Google and I typed in Orion 440 280, and it brought me right to references about Barnard's Loop. Barnard's Loop measures 440 by 280 light years, not cubits.
No, it doesn't. Are you not? No. Now you're messing with me, Laird.
No, it does. It does. Absolutely. Look it up.
Man, Risa, he's messing with me.
Yeah, Risa to fact check that. No, it's true. It does. That's true? I did not know that. Yeah, it's true. So the whole purpose of this pyramid layout, the Dogon say the reason they place large stones on a plateau to represent stars when it comes to the belt stars is to point us to a structure they call the chariot of Orion. And that when you can't see Barnard's Loop with the naked eye, but with time-lapse photography, you can see the spiral. It's very faint light that when you collect enough of it, you can see it creates a spiral. When you image that, it looks like the wheel of a chariot that Orion the Hunter is standing in. That's the chariot of Orion the Dogon are talking about.
That is fascinating. The idea presented here is that somebody is teaching the basics of they're looking for a theory of everything. Right, that's the goal. The theory of everything.
Right,
and it would appear to me that is what was going on. These teachers did have the answers,
Right.
and were sharing that knowledge.
Right. Because
Right?
they felt that if we understood what our true role was in the big picture, where
Mhm.
where humanity really sits in relation to the big picture, that we would make better choices for ourselves and for everyone as a result of that. At the same time, they were trying to teach us they were trying to promote a skill called discriminating knowledge. This is basically the ability to take a set of facts and draw an inference from the facts. We know that the facts are very important, but the inferences are hugely more powerful. I was talking to you that the facts are that the dynamics of energy are the same on all scales. That's good to know. But the hugely powerful inference is that we can use that to our advantage, that we can look at what we can see and use it to estimate what has to be happening on the domains that we can't directly see. We don't have to see the quantum domain. All we have to do is know how energy works every place else.
The significance of this, if this unravels, Laird, is this crazier? What ET contact, or we had teachers teaching us that predate everything?
Okay,
what's a crazier concept for the?
I think there was both going on in ancient times. I think there was
You think so?
traditional off-planet sci-fi style alien contact, and I think there was also this. It's not interdimensional; it's inter-energetic domain contacts. As a matter of fact, the Egyptian glyph that represents the domain next to ours, our domain is represented by the number 1. The domain next to ours, which has a pace of time that runs 10 times quicker than ours does, is represented by the symbol of a gateway. The very idea is that they're able to cross over into our domain at certain times. You imagine you're a fish swimming just below the surface of the water in the ocean, and a motorboat goes by on the surface. How much is that going to look to you like a UFO looks to us?
It is a UFO. That's 100%. That's 100% a UFO.
Risa just brought me a piece of paper. It says Barnard's Loop. This image has captured the whole figure, blah, blah, blah. The loop has a real size of 440 by 280 light years in ellipse.
Wow, that's crazy. Oh, by the way, I let this skip.
The source of that, it's a place called Stellar Scenes online.
Laird, you share the birthday with my daughter Nicole.
Oh, really? That's great. That's
yeah. I let that.
You can tell her I'm pretty close to done with it. Pretty soon it'll be hers.
Oh man. So if this is indeed the case, do you feel that that this is clearly understood, that there was a group of teachers teaching us that predates civilization and what we were taught, but that the academia understands this? And maybe state actors understand.
Researching that book on tracing Orkney's origins, I came across a researcher of the Near Eastern cultures. And he writes, he doesn't know of an ancient culture that didn't claim assistance from someone more capable than them in ancient times. He says, as far as he's concerned, it's time to be done with all that nonsense. That's the conclusion he draws from that fact.
Now, see, de Broglie or Niels Bohr or any of those cats, right? John Wheeler, if they thought like that, we wouldn't progress anywhere. You got to think outside of the box, right? You have to.
Definitely. So now, one of the really interesting things for me is that I was recently approached to provide some interpretation about another cosmology, a cosmological system that is given in yet another language than the ones I've studied, that is represented using symbolic shapes and terminology that's just sort of off the wall terminology. It sounds like nonsense. But I dug through a series of documents and discovered it's all the same stuff as the Dogon. It's just given from a different perspective. If you imagine that Einstein and these physicists and even the Dogon and some of the ancient cultures are standing by a swimming pool, and they're all walking around the deck of the swimming pool, looking down through the water of the pool and making comments about what the bottom of the pool must be like. Well, that's very interesting, and we can learn a lot by cross-comparing what they all think with each other, especially when you have groups like the Dogon who seem to know. But this new cosmological information is given from the perspective of the bottom of the pool. It's
right.
The same material, but given from an entirely different perspective than all the other presentations of it are. And to make things even more interesting, the language that it's given in is formulated in exactly the same way the Dogon language is formulated. So I immediately began by figuring out how to interpret individual words that they were giving us and being able to pin down what they meant. And I could actually trace some of their terminology to specific Egyptian words and specific Dogon words. So it's all the same stuff given from a different perspective, really from a more energetic perspective. You know, we can't pin down the reality of certain things objectively. We can't pin down the reality of certain things that happen on the quantum scale. This group can't pin down the reality of certain things that happen on a material scale. So their starting point is, of course, an electron doesn't really exist. And then they go on to explain what we should really understand it as being.
Let's take our break. Okay, I blew past the break that was supposed to happen 20 minutes ago. So let me get that in, Laird. I've got to pay the bills. So let's get that done. Our guest tonight, Laird Scranton. And now here's the situation. When we come back, we're talking about the Dogon and physics, but I'm going to push things a little bit further too as well. And we'll do all of that when we come back. Our guest, Laird Scranton. This is Fade to Black. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now.
My job is not to preach. My job is to take you on this journey.
In a state of passion, nothing negative can happen.
That it's the moons of those planets that would have life.
Sometimes I see, these energies also in your field.
It is our passion and our pleasure.
Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. This is Jimmy Church. Please visit and explore Egypt this October 3rd through the 14th, 2024 with Billy, Elizabeth, myself, and very special guest and the #1 podcaster in the world, Sean Kelly. It's simple to do. Just go to forbiddenknowledge.com and click on upcoming tours, or click on the link below. We'll see you there. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. And right now, if you get a Game Changer membership for a limited time, you will get Fade to Black Blend coffee with your Game Changer membership. That's right. We have 2 t-shirts. We have the original, the classic Fade to Black t-shirt. You know you want one. Post a picture. Send it to us. We'll put it in our Fade to Black gallery. And we've got the new official Fade to Black t-shirt drawn by Michael Oming. 2 t-shirts, 2 ways to get them. Get yours today. Everything is in stock. Everything gets autographed. Everything includes shipping, and you're going to get a tracking number. And with a Game Changer membership, you get an email to me. You get unlimited commercial-free downloads of the show. Those are uploaded every single night after the show to the website. So don't delay. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Beckley Teppy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back. Our guest tonight, Laird Scranton. And I was just texting with my daughter, Nicole, about the shared birthdays with Laird. Laird's birthday is today. He's 71. And Laird, she replied back. She goes, "You got to move your birthday to tomorrow." I said, Laird just said. It's so funny.
You know, I have a sister in New Zealand. I suppose I can cross the international date line and push it a day.
Yeah, there you go. Nothing wrong with that. I want to circle back. You suggested that Göbekli Tepe may have been the school, a centralized location where this information was shared through. Kind of like what Alexandria later represented is the cultures gathered there at Göbekli Tepe and shared what they were taught?
Yeah, you wonder why there are so many duplicate enclosures there. You know, there are a whole bunch that are still buried. They haven't even excavated yet. It looks to me like every class of initiates, the Dogon say eight initiates were taken from a region and to a remote location and instructed in civilizing skills and in cosmology and other subjects. It looks like each class created one of those enclosures and they practiced megalithic stone working skills, and they practiced stone carving, and they practiced agriculture, and they practiced a bunch of things. The same thing on Orkney Island. They have the standing stones of Stennis. They know there were 12 stones originally. It looks like the last stone was never actually placed, but it looks to me as if every class of initiates was being walked through the whole process. They were being shown how to extract a stone and how to move it and how to raise it in a spot. But before they did that, they took down one of the previous stones and moved it somewhere nearby. There are 4 of those stones sitting inside the Maze Howe cairn, and there are others of them around that are exact duplicates of what you see at the standing stones of Stennis, but they're somewhere distantly nearby. So it looks to me like classes of 8. The Scarabray village would house 8 families. Looks like these were the families of the initiates. It's basically dorm housing. So my guess is at Göbekli Tepe, they did the same thing. They took, you can judge by a lot of the enclosures have seating. They have benches built in, and you can judge by how many people could be seated on those benches, how many they must have been teaching at one time.
It is beyond coincidence, and I'm still waiting for the explanation. And if we get to it, it'll be wonderful. But if you look at the standing stones of Stennis, of course, Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, Karahunj, Nabta Playa is another great example of this too, as well. Much smaller in scale, but nonetheless extremely ancient. Some would suggest predating Giza by a couple of thousand years. And Nabta Playa, for those that don't know, was a small stone circle out in the middle of nowhere in the Sahara Desert on a trade route. But predated Giza. But these stone circles are all over the planet. And it either it is embedded in our DNA, the vision to put these together, or there was somebody teaching this information on how to quarry, how to carve, how to place, and you have astronomy and the cosmos side of this too as well that applies to all of this. And it can't be as simple as, it was just the seasons. The ancients understood. No, it's a much more complex idea, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, definitely. There are some complicated energetics that are involved. In the Neolithic period on Orkney, those standing stones of Stennis are situated on an isthmus between 2 bodies of water, 2 lochs. In Neolithic times, one of those lochs was fresh water, and the other one was heavily salinated water. And in between sat this isthmus, which is wet clay. And so they were placing highly iron-rich sandstone pillars in a circle in that wet clay. They've created a battery that's actually a documented modern way of producing a very powerful battery. And they were doing it in the context of some other structures. The Maze Howe cairn repeats the how can I say this, the geometry of superconductivity. The shape of the cairn and with the trench around the outside of it is precisely the geometry of superconductivity, which is another concept of the same energetics. So it looks to me as if somebody on Orkney in Neolithic times was using all of that to power something. The most likely thing that was involved, if these teachers had emerged from another domain, they probably wanted communication with that other domain. And so the question is, how were they holding open a way to communicate back and forth?
Isn't this exactly, let's go back to Schrodinger, right? Where today physics, you don't have to go far outside of the world of science to see these concepts discussed in pop culture, right? The ideas of the multiverse or parallel worlds or extra dimensions, even time travel and faster than light and communication ideas are there in pop culture now today too as well. And this would be the very basic of the way the universe operates. And it's clearly represented right there in front of us, isn't it?
It is. I mean, nobody tried to hide anything. It's if you know what they're talking about, it's right out in plain view. Talk about the esoteric secret tradition. Even in Dogon culture, there's no attempt to hide anything. Anybody who wants to learn this stuff can. The French anthropologist who studied the Dogon proved that. I mean, he asked to be initiated, and after about 20 years of demonstrating his sincerity in trying to understand it, he got permission from a council of Dogon priests to be initiated. He even wrote a book about it. He called it Conversations with Ogatameli. Actually, the original book in French is called God of Water, because the outlook is that water provides us with the pattern for how energy works. There's a natural water cycle, though this is the cycle where water evaporates from the oceans to create clouds that float up over the top of mountains and then cool off, and they drop rain that flows back down the mountains to the sea again. Without that cycle of water, you wouldn't have any life on Earth. The Dogons say without the cycle of energy, you wouldn't have life in the universe. And they say that cycle is our pattern for how water works. So part of what's happening in my Waters of Life book is I'm demonstrating how that's true. Stephen Hawking described the evaporation of energy from black holes. That's our starting point. It compares to the evaporation of water from the seas. That evaporation of energy creates something that are called instanton knots. And instanton knots hold the potential for 3 monopoles of energy inside of them. Those monopoles condense in a very primordial state. They condense into monopoles of energy, 2 monopoles of magnetism and 1 of electricity. Those are a proton-electron pair. It's what the Dogon considered to be the basic unit of energy, is a proton-electron pair. That's the same thing that science says a neutron is, and it's the same thing that a hydrogen atom is, except that the electron has moved away from the proton. So these are all rudimentary basics. The Dogon get more basic than that. They're trying to describe to us, here's how magnetism moves, and here's how electricity moves. And they even include specific diagrams that are exact copies of how science diagrams things, carved into the door panels of the houses of their priests. They do cosmological drawings that compare to how astrophysicists describe concepts like of spinning energy, angular momentum, and resistance and resonance and concepts like that. There are only about half a dozen different concepts a person has to learn, and they all relate to each other. So the Dogon were basically trying to give us the building blocks to put together to figure out how all this stuff works. And they introduce us to some new concepts. We know about linear dimensionality. We know that linear dimensionality compares to geometry, that 2 points define a line, and 4 points define an area, and 8 points define a volume. Well, Einstein says there's another dimensional concept we have to think about, and that's time. But time isn't linear geometry, isn't linear dimensionality. He's introducing us to a concept that I call energetic dimensionality. And the Dogon say energetic dimensionality is a concept you need to know about, that the instanton knots define 3 monopoles. The magnetism is based on 2 monopoles, a north and a south pole, and an electron is based on 1 monopole, which is a point charge of electricity. So you have a 3-2-1 of energetic dimensionality that's now interfacing at the geometric point with a line, an area, and a volume. There are 2 sets of dimensionalities we have to be concerned about. So the Dogon are getting us down into very basic concepts like that, because those are the things we need to be on top of to understand when they start talking about this continuum of energy, that it might be scientific and give us something to check it out based on. But as I said, the concept starts to be so subtle that it's only people like de Broglie and Einstein and Schrodinger that are talking about it. There's a guy named Gamow, George Gamow, who does a lot of discussion about how a hydrogen atom works. And a lot of the Dogon concepts are verified by him. In these books, they speculate about what they think might be true, and a lot of those speculations are right on the nose what the Dogon say.
I was recently, I wonder how Peru fits into all of this too as well. And that includes India, and that includes Asia and the Far East.
Right.
So I'm at this site in Peru. I'm high up in the Andes. And the shamans that were with us, again, oral history traditions, right? And I'm listening to them. So at the top, we are up there, man. We're 14,000 feet, right? We're up there. And
it's a Sacred Valley area, right?
This is way beyond that. Sacred Valley's lower. Anyway, I can show you pictures. We're late in the show, but anyway. So above us is a glacier, and you can see it. And then that's one water source.
Right.
Now, I need you to follow me on this. The other water source is from underground, from an aquifer in the mountain. So the melting glacier is coming down. The pressurized, I'm going to call it granite water, right? Earth water is coming out of the ground. It pools in two separate pools on the top. It is channeled down, and you can see it. And it's so frigging ancient, but it's operational, and you're watching this happen. So I'm standing at this point. They're telling me what's going on. I can see the one pool of water. I can see the other pool of water here. It's channeled down, comes down, and combines in the pool at my feet.
Right.
Okay. That is coming out, and it goes down. It's a series of stone canals. They're not very wide. They're like this wide, maybe that deep, but it's action. You can see everything's moving, right? Okay, so it's coming down. That's going out through one point. So now the two different types of water, right? The glacier water and the water from the earth are now combined into this pool. It goes down into another pool and then out through two channels. So it goes from 2 to 1 to 2. And I see it spitting out, and I'm watching the waves.
Wow.
Right? Are you with me?
Yeah.
And then the next pool, so it's 2 to 1 to 2. The next pool has got 4 channels. And I'm watching that go, and it's right in front of me. It's so mechanical. And so now I see the 4, and I'm seeing the waves spit out, go back into 2 slits, back into 1, and then it feeds the valley. Wow. And I'm like, this is the double slit experiment.
Yeah, wow. That's
right.
amazing.
Yeah. And I'm watching it running. Wow. Right? I'm seeing it. I'm why. And to see the waves spread out perfectly and then recombine. And he's going through this elaborate, Laird, you're going to love this. He's going through this elaborate explanation. Well, it's the energy from the glacier ice is different than the energy of the water that is coming from the earth. But the combination of the two different types of water need to come back in here through the 2 pools, and the combination of the water makes this magical water to sustain life. And this is how it's combined, and it's going through. And I'm like, dude, that's amazing, and I love that, and it's probably accurate, but it's also physics.
Right.
We're watching physics play out here.
Right.
And I'm telling you, Laird, it was like, I shot this video and watching from what I know, right, about the double slit experiment and particles and waves and observation, right?
Right.
And I'm like, dude, it's going down in front of me. with ancient, it was mind blowing.
And when you think of how far back in time that had to have gone, amazing.
Yeah. It's so that goes back to what you and I were talking about before the show. It's one thing to read this stuff in a book or read somebody's idea and theory and, the way that you postulate these things and try to, get these through the rinse cycle and somehow get these clothes folded. But it's a whole nother thing to go out and look at these sites and to observe it, to smell it, to touch it. It's a crazy thing to see. We know nothing. We're trying to understand, but the ancients had a firm grip on this. The concept of combining two different types of water. Okay, well, dude, you can just pour that in a bowl and stir it up. But you know what I mean? They had this elaborate, engineered thing coming down at 14,000 feet in the mountains, coming down and then feeding down into the valley.
Wow.
Running today. It's just running. You can hear it. You can see it. It's magnificent.
Wow. So there's the energetics of how the two waters come together, but there's also the distribution power of the force of all that water to get it spread out to all the places they probably wanted to irrigate.
I probably have. Hold on for a second. Let me see if I can pull this up. I probably have. Okay, let me see if I can pull this up fast enough. I will present this to you. Hold on, just give me a second, and I'm going to show you an image. And when you see this, it's one thing to talk about curves and megaliths and corners and how things are joined. I get all of that. But when you see something like this, that is obviously mechanical in nature, and the concepts of physics and the double slit experiment, it's crazy. Okay. All right. Stay with me. I'm zoning in. Here it is. Okay, I think. Okay, all right. This is close enough. I may have another image, but check this out, Laird. This is just. To me. Okay, so you see that?
Yes, amazing.
Okay, now what's behind it?
Right. The 4.
And then what's behind it? Yeah, this is the 4. There's the 2 behind it. And up here is the 1. You can see a channel coming down here and a channel coming down here. And then this coming out here. And then what's in front of it? A 1.
Wow.
4 into 1 coming down into this channel. I may have. Yeah. Okay, so look. This is all feeding. See this channel down here at the bottom?
Right.
That's coming down off of this wall, which is coming down from up here.
Wow.
Right? And it's just feeding into each other all the way down. That's the channel. And this is all going into the 4 into 1. Look at this.
Amazing.
Yeah. And I'm telling you, when I say I'm at 14,000 feet, I'm way high up in the Andes.
Right.
So this is at the top. Here we go. Okay. So look at this. Look at this image. This is the 2 into 1. That's the final distribution right there. So heading up to the top, there's the 1 coming out. Now you can see the channel down here feeding out. This is feeding the valley Okay.
Uh-huh.
So there's the channel here. But it was just crazy. And, watching this, actually in motion today. Okay. That's all. I've got more. I've got a video and some other stuff too as well. But that's that's the double slit happening right there. And the concept of combining the elements like that. Like I said, you could put it in a bowl and stir it up.
Right.
But they had another way to approach this. Fascinating.
So the people, I presume, still use that water for things.
It's running the valley.
Wow.
You can look. So from up there, you can look down into the farmland below. And it's been like this for thousands of years. This isn't, some new thing. This is ancient. And you can hear it, you can observe it, you can see the glaciers, you can see it all, and it's just operating, and you can hear it. You can hear all the channels running.
Wow.
Oh, man. I turned to this archaeologist that was with me, 50-year professional archaeologist who was great. And I go, dude, this is Schrodinger's cat. And he spins and he looks at me. He goes, this is the double slit. I go, it is, right? I'm not imagining this. He goes, no. And let me explain. His eyes just lit up. He's like, you see, I do. I see it. That's exactly what's happening here. And to watch the waves form, right, out of the two slits coming down, that was crazy.
Wow.
Crazy. To Laird, you've been around the world. You understand that this engineering marvel that was built a couple of thousand years ago or longer is still functioning today.
Right.
There isn't any moving parts here.
Right.
It just runs.
That's the key. Trying to get things down to no moving parts.
Just sit there, cyclical, just running, just a machine. Fascinating to see. There was, I want to mention this to you. There was a press release the other day. You mentioned gamma rays earlier, right?
Right.
There's a press release came out today that there is fungi in Chernobyl,
right,
whose food source is gamma radiation.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, not oxygen, not water, not sunlight.
This sounds like plasma-based life to me.
Yeah. Found a way to live, right?
Yeah.
And it was just mind-blowing. And now there was another part to this, and this goes back to the Dogon. You had mentioned this earlier, and I talked about this last week on the show, that there is the common frog. If you take its genetic modification history in its DNA, okay? Right? Every step of its modification in its DNA, it exactly matches the Fibonacci sequence.
Wow.
Right? Each step. It's just like, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. Yeah. How little we actually know.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. Now, why? I want to close with this, probably the most controversial part that you always get asked about this, but let's address this. There has been a lot of effort to debunk the Dogon knowledge of the cosmos.
Right.
Why is that? Let's just keep it right there. Why try to go and debunk the Dogon history and where they got their knowledge from? What's the purpose of that?
I don't know. There's misdirection all the way around, starting at around, I see it around 1970, where there seem to be active efforts to sort of misdirect people from certain things. I see it in Egypt. The building of the dam in Egypt covered up all sorts of potential evidence that was covered by floodwater from the Nile because of the dam. About in the early 1980s, there were changes in the way that Egyptologists interpreted the phonetics of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And the net effect of those changes was to disconnect the language from some of the African language roots, and to prefer the connections that were later Greek roots. It's hard to tell how much of that comes out of just the prejudices, the Western leaning prejudices of the modern academic researchers, and how much of it is more nefarious than that. This is part of the reason I brought up the disappearance of that paper of de Broglie's, is that's a situation where we can directly point to what has to have been positive action on the part of a set of specific people to keep that paper back. With some of the other misdirections, it's a lot more subtle than that. Carl Sagan, who was sort of the hatchet man for a lot of that stuff, he was a popular spokesperson for science, and was well trusted among the public in terms of his scientific background. He was the one who was responsible for a lot of the debunking of the Dogon stuff, and he didn't do basic homework. He couldn't have done basic homework. We know that. I mean, he's talking about trying to show that his opinion was that the Dogon knowledge of the stars of Sirius had to have come from a modern visitor to the Dogon. But you only have to look at ancient Egyptian myths of Isis, who represents the bright star of Sirius, to know that she has a dark sister, Nephthys. So very clearly, knowledge of those two stars existed at 3000 BC in ancient Egypt. He doesn't notice that a great deal of the Dogon language corresponds to ancient Egyptian words. So pretty much everything the Dogon are saying is reflected in Egyptian language. This is very, very basic stuff, very easy to disprove. There was a restudy done of the Dogon cosmology. The French anthropologists spent 30 years bringing teams in every year to Dogon country to do their studies. Griel was considered the premier anthropologist of Europe at the time he did these studies. He was using all the technology. He was using television cameras and film and audio recording and all sorts of different technological devices. The restudy was only like a 3-year restudy, and it was done by a Belgian man whose specialty was ecology, not even religion. And the Belgians team went in and concluded that Griot had made it up a lot, or the Dogon had fabricated a lot of the information for the benefit of Griot. He said that Griot basically imagined the Dogon granary shrine, which is key to the system. But it's very easy to demonstrate that the Dogon shrine is a form of a Buddhist stupa. And as soon as you make that connection, you realize that all the same information exists in Buddhism that Griot was talking about. So it's really sloppy jobs of trying to misdirect this stuff. I can't say for certain what the motive might have been, except that if there are powers that be that understand that there really are intelligences other than ours out there, whether they're off-planet sci-fi intelligences or whether they're energetic intelligences, that they're doing their best to hold back our discovering that. One of the first lectures I attended in college was given by Margaret Mead, and she was talking about her advice to the U.S. government. She was the one who, based on knowledge of all the ancient cultures, pointed out that really bad things happen to the lesser culture when they come in contact with the greater culture. And so you point to the Incas and people like that, and you see that it may not be a smart idea to let the lesser culture know that the more advanced culture exists. So it could be as benign a motive as that, to hold back the public perception that these things are real. You see attempts at disclosure in the UFO world. I know you're just back from a UFO conference, aren't you, Jimmy?
I'm always at a conference. Yeah.
Yeah. But that there, in recent years, higher and higher authorities and governmental bodies have been admitting or seeming to admit, on their deathbeds or whatever, that UFOs are real. You have, high-ranking astronauts who are saying, these UFOs are real. But the disclosure we're getting from government, it doesn't really cut it. As far from my point of view, if it's anything short of Klaatu and Gort landing on the National Mall in their spaceship, it's not disclosure. For them they now basically take the stance that, well, these devices are real, but we're not going to admit they're alien.
Well, it's the same. It's cognitive dissonance, right? Because it's the same thing in anthropology. It's the same thing with the study of ancient cultures and civilization as it is with anything else outside of the box, and that includes ET and UFOs and contact.
Right.
That Gobekli Tepe, Zahi Hawass, and that famous, I'm going to say infamous, not famous, that infamous video of him and Graham Hancock getting in that fight over Robert Bauval.
Right.
And Bauval is up on stage, Laird, and you know the video, sound checking for his presentation that night on Gobekli Tepe. And Zahi Hawass, Graham, to his benefit, is like, dude, just let him do his thing.
Yeah.
What's he going to talk about? He's going to be presenting on Gobekli Tepe. What is this Gobekli Tepe? I've never heard of it. Dude, stop with that.
Yeah.
Right? But it's that you cannot go outside of your lane. You cannot. That's it. And Gobekli Tepe represented exactly what the system didn't want out there.
Right. Well, a lot of that has to do with personal turf and with personal reputation and
funding, tourism, money. The dogma presented forever and right now to today is Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, and Giza, 3000 BC. That's the end of the discussion. There's nothing else to talk about here.
Right.
That's it. Everything is based on that. Careers, tourism, economies. I get that. Academia. I understand that. But Gobekli Tepe surfaces, and it's predating that by 7,000 years. It simply wasn't supposed to exist.
That's right.
And the standing stones of Stennis represent that too as well.
Right. They don't go back quite as far. So, 3600 BC isn't that far off the mark of 3000 BC for Egypt. But so it's not quite as much of a threat. But Gobekli Tepe certainly is, because you're right, that's not supposed to be there. And so it's largely right. The academia is largely left to sort of put their fingers in their ears and plug their, close their eyes and make noise not to hear what's being said to them. That's about really the only option they have, because you can't deny that the sites near Gobekli Tepe are legitimate.
That's it. And how many more are we going to discover?
Right. And we may. And actually, I think that there are sites from previous cycles. I think that the Ice Age sort of puts up a block to evidence, but there's lots of signs to me that the previous cycle had all the same stuff, that the rumors of Atlantis come out of the same kind of a tradition. And that looks like previous cycle stuff.
Well, when it happens, and it's going to happen, I don't know what kind of upset is going to be there in academia. The rest of the world, I don't think anything is shocking anymore.
Right. Well, that's true. Thanks to Star Trek and Star Wars and things like that. Actually, Star Trek did us a huge favor by sort of putting us in the mindset of where we might be going.
Laird, all my best to you, my friend. Happy birthday. Where can everybody go and get your stuff? How many books do you have out right now? You've got.
I'm working on the manuscript for the 15th book. And they sort of move geographically. So we're covering a bunch of different cultures and a lot of different languages and a lot of different symbols, and cross comparing what all these different cultures think about these things.
Well, keep doing what you're doing. I've got your links up to Amazon, and I'm going to go and I just tell Risa thank you. I got her
thank you very
email.
Much. I apologize for overspeaking you a couple of times.
I'm the one interrupting you on your birthday.
This is age showing through.
Laird, man, I love you, brother. Just thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing. If you end up
going to go back to Tepe, I'd be happy to come too.
I'll drag you along with me, my friend.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Laird.
Yep.
Happy birthday.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
71 years old and getting it done. I say this all the time. Thank you, Laird. What have you done with your life lately? What have you done? Well, the answer is I haven't done enough. Laird Scranton, what a perfect show tonight. And happy birthday, Laird. Absolutely incredible. Happy birthday, of course, to my daughter, Nicole, as well. It's pretty cool that they share the same birthday. Want to remind everybody that tomorrow night on the show, we have survivalist Cody London on with us tomorrow night. We'll be talking about his new TV show as well. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboys, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and this broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. I'll see everybody tomorrow. But until then, I want you to be safe. Go Backley Tappy.